The coronavirus pandemic has disrupted our life in so many ways. Even for me, that I just started to talk in the physical conferences in the end of the year of 2019, all the conferences, the physical one that came after, has been canceled. And in this situation in life, you maybe can be sad, but from my perspective for life, we don't have time to be sad. Life are so short, and because of that, we always need to think about how to create a good situations from a bad ones. And this is exactly what I've done when the coronavirus pandemic has started. In the beginning, we had a lot more time to spend at home. And in the first few days, I was rearrange my apartment, move everything, change everything, open my sofa to a bed that sometimes I can sleep in my living room, the aquarium that didn't work for 5 years. I put some water and some fishes and everything to create a good mood to stay at home. And then came the first weekend that we cannot go out anywhere. And I thought to myself, what I will do with all this free time? And I remember that several years ago, I created a pure CSS game, which is called Kill the Birds, that so many web developers all around the world loved it very much. And I thought to myself that in the last several years, I learned so many new tricks in CSS that now I can create a lot better one. But I needed an idea of what it will be about. And it was one of the most easiest ideas that I had in my life. Because if we are now living in the coronavirus pandemic time, why not to create a coronavirus game? And this is exactly what I've done. I created this pure CSS game, which is called the Coronavirus Invaders. And everything that you are seeing right now is done only while using CSS and HTML. Yes, for the CSS part, I'm using CSS preprocessor. And even for the HTML part, I'm using an HTML preprocessor. But all the logic of the game, like when I'm clicking on the OMI button, it's opening a pop-up, the logic of the opening and the closing of the pop-up is done only while using CSS and HTML. And when I will click the Save the World button, the play button of the game, it will hide the game navigation and will open the game frame itself. Even that logic is done only while using CSS and HTML. And when I will click some viruses, they will be disappear and the score of the game will go up. Even that is done only while using CSS and HTML. And what about the countdown? No, really? The countdown is built only while using CSS. But before you're writing any single line of code in your own project, you need to think about something that inspires you. And I don't know why I remember an old code pen that I saw that was painted on Canvas HTML in the middle of the year of 2018 with this small creature that remind me a little bit the coronavirus creatures. And I needed to think about a name for the game, and I don't know why I remember the Chicken Invaders, and I took the Invaders word from it and some other design ideas on how to design the main navigation. And when you're thinking about inspiration, is always to take other older ideas and to create from them something else, something new. And the first thing that I wanted to create is to create the coronavirus creatures. And it's nice to see that this was my inspiration, and in the end, I created something different, and I love it because this is my creature. And then I wanted to start to create the HTML of this coronavirus creature. And for me, the HTML is very important. It's not just to take an HTML element and to forward it to an HTML document. No, this is an object of HTML of coronavirus creature, and it needs to be very precise. Then I created this label HTML element with a class of coronavirus, and I put it inside an input type radio. And you may ask why I'm using here a label HTML element and why there is an input type radio inside. This is part of the logic that we will talk about it little bit later. But all the visual part of the coronavirus creature that you are seeing right now is starting inside the body. We have the body. Inside the body, we have those 12 hairs, and of course, is both eyes. But from the beginning, I saw that I have a lot of repetition in my HTML code, like to create those 12 errors, and in the real game, I have 100 viruses. And I didn't want to copy paste them one by one, and I needed to think about a way to solve this problem. And in my first time in my life, I'm using here an HTML preprocessor with the name of Pug that give you the possibility to do the HTML in a lot more smarter way with repetition and variables. And yes, for the CSS part, I'm using the CSS preprocessor of Sass that I'm using in the last 10 years for every one of my projects. And now, instead of doing this repetition, for example, all those 12 hairs, we can write it in a more smarter way with Pug. We have variables, while loop. But as you can see, Pug is being compiled to regular HTML, but it's being written very different. And when you are working with Pug, you cannot write half Pug and half HTML. If you are working with Pug, you need to write everything in Pug. And this means that I needed to update all the HTML code to the new way that Pug is being written. And yes, you need to get used to it. But all this project I was creating in 2 days in the weekend, and I was learning Pug meanwhile I was creating this project. Because of that, everyone can learn Pug. It's really not so hard. And then I wanted to start to paint the visual part of the coronavirus creature. I started with the body of the coronavirus creature. I gave it position relative. Why position relative? Because all the part of the coronavirus creature needs to be according to its body, the ears and the eyes. And to the body, I gave width and height of 100 pixel, background color black, and border radius of 50% to get the circle shapes. To create all of the eyes and to select the two classes, if you remember, I1 and I2 together, I'm using here the attribute selector. And in the same way, width and height, little bit different, background color white and border radius of 50%. Because the width and the height are a little bit different, it's getting the egg shape that is nice to get. To locate both of the eyes, I gave both of them position absolute, top 25%, the first eye from the left 25%, the right eye from the right 25%, a little bit rotate Z to the inside. To create the inner part of the eyes without adding another HTML element, I'm using here the before pseudo element. And in the same way, width, height, background color, and border radius. And if you are looking what I created until now, is just circles, circles, and circles. To create the corona hairs, and if you remember all the classes between A1 until A12, again, I'm using here the attribute selector that selects me all those classes combined. And every one of the hairs is created from two boxes. And I'm creating them with the before and the after pseudo element. The after pseudo element is the root of the hair, is one box that I'm putting in the bottom, and the crown of the hair is another box that I'm putting up above. And to get the circle shape, I'm just giving the crown of the hair what? Border radius of 50%. To locate all those hair, first I gave all of them position absolute and locate all of them exactly in the middle, in the center of the coronavirus creature, exactly here in the middle. And now, one by one, with the transform property, I want to put them around the coronavirus creature. The first hair, getting the transform property with a rotate z value of 0 degrees that still doesn't do anything, and then translate to y value with a value of minus 65 pixels that taking the hair from the center to the top. But the second hair need to be top and little bit to the right, in this way. How I'm locating it? Hair 2 will now get the transform property, but now with rotate z value of 30 degrees and only then the translate y value of minus 65 pixels. This way, the rotate z is affecting on the translate y-axis and taking the hair from the top, but little bit to the right, to here. And if you didn't know until now, the order of the value and the transform property are very important because they are affecting each other. And in this way, I just located all those 12 hairs around the coronavirus creature. As you can see here, different rotate z value and the same translate y value. But as you can see here, we have a lot of repetition in our code. And we as a web developers don't love to create repetition. How can we do it in another way? Because I'm working with a CSS preprocessor of Sass, in Sass we have the special feature of for loop. And this is exactly what I'm doing in my real code. I'm creating a Sass variable with the name of start position, and I give it a value of 0 degrees. And then I'm creating the Sass for loop that have another Sass variable with the name of I that is going dynamically between 1 to 12. In every one of the iteration, this created me dynamically the CSS selector between R1 until R12. In every one of the iteration, the Sass variable with the name of start position is getting bigger by 30 degrees, and I'm just putting the Sass variable inside the rotate z value inside the transform property. And in this way, I just now created you this CSS. Nice. But I wanted this creature to feel a lot more alive, and I wanted to add some animation for all those hairs. But I had a problem. Every one of the hair have a different transform value. And it's mean that if I want to do animation for all those hairs, I need to create 12 different animation. And because I didn't want to create them one by one, how I creating all of them in the same Sass for loop. I'm creating all those CSS animation dynamically in the same Sass for loop. And I wanted that this creature will feel a lot more alive, and I wanted to add animation for the eyes parts. And I added two animation for the eyes, one for the inner part of the eyes that they will move a little bit. And I wanted to create the effect that the eyes are getting closed. To do that, I'm using here the second pseudo element of every one of the eye, the after pseudo element. And it has a width of 100%, height of 0 pixel, you don't see it, and background color black. Because it has a height of 0 pixel, you don't see it. But in the animation of it, every 5 seconds in the animation, only in the last half second, it's getting a height of 100%. And in this way, the eyes are getting closed. Nice. But enough talking about this creature, now let's start about all the logic of the game. And the first thing that you need to understand is how we are separating logically all the frames that we saw in our own game. And let's take a look again on the game itself. Let's see it. Yes. Okay. The first frame that we can see here is the game menu frame. And this is the first frame that we need to represent in our HTML code. When I will click on the How to Play button, it will open a pop-up, and this is another frame with a type of pop-up. And yes, we can put frame above other frames. The third frame in the same idea, when I click on the UMI, it will open another pop-up in the same way. This is the third frame that we need to represent in our code. And the last frame that we need to represent in our code is when I will click the Save the World button, it will hide the game menu frame and will open the game frame itself, where we are playing the game itself, okay? This is our last four frame that we need to represent in our code. Okay, how I'm representing them in the HTML code? In a very easy way, I'm just creating four separated section HTML element. And as you can see by the class name or by the ID name, the first frame is the game menu frame. The second one is the game frame itself. The third one is the pop-up of who am I, and the last one is the pop-up of how to play. But when I'm loading the game, I want to see only the game menu frame. I don't want to see all the other frames. How I'm hiding all the other frames except the game menu frame? I'm just giving all the other frames display none. And in this way, when I'm loading the game, I'm only seeing the game menu frame. But now I need to create some flags that they will tell me if something is open or something is closed. How can I create flags without using any JavaScript? If you are thinking about a form HTML element, for example, input of checkboxes, checkboxes, they are like flags. Unchecked, false. Checked, true. And this is exactly what I'm adding in the beginning of the HTML document. I'm adding three different checkboxes. Every one of them is doing different operation. Every one of them have a specific ID name. The first one that has the ID name of Toggle Game, if it's unchecked, this is meaning that I want to see the game menu frame, but to hide the game frame. But if it's checked, I want to see the game frame, but to hide the game menu frame. The two other checkboxes are even more simple to understand. The first checkbox that has the ID name of how to play pop-up, if it's unchecked, don't show me the how to play pop-up, and if it's checked, please show me the how to play pop-up. The same way for the third checkbox with the ID of my pop-up. If it's unchecked, don't show me the UMI pop-up, and if it's checked, please show me the UMI pop-up. But those are just checkboxes that I'm putting in the beginning of the HTML document. Opacity of 0, position absolute top minus something. You cannot see them, you cannot click them. And now we need a way to trigger those checkboxes without clicking on them specific. How can I do it? For this, I'm using a very old feature of HTML. The button that you saw in the game navigation are not button HTML element. Instead, I'm using here label HTML element. And label HTML element can trigger any input that you want with a for attribute that can be connected to a specific ID name. For example, the save the world label button element is a label that have the for attribute of toggle game. This is this ID name of this checkbox. You see toggle game, toggle game. And if I will click this label button, it will trigger this checkbox and it will change its status from unchecked to checked. If you will click it again, it will change again from checked and unchecked, and as many times you will click on it. Okay? The two other label button the same. If I will click, for example, on the OMI, this will trigger the checkbox that has the ID name of OMI pop-up, OMI pop-up. This is it will change its status from unchecked to check. You will click it again from checked to unchecked, and as many times you will clicking on it. But this is only changing those statuses of those checkboxes. Now we need to use this status to show or hide other frames of the game. And to do that, I'm using here two special CSS features. The first feature is the check pseudo class. I can see if there is a specific checkbox that is in the status of checked. And if there is a specific checkbox in the status of checked, I can use the sibling selector and to select any sibling element that come after. And I can give it display block, display none, and in this way, I can show or hide other frames of the game. And this is exactly what I'm doing in my real game. For example, when I'm clicking on the how to play button, this triggering the checkbox that has the ID name of how to play pop-up, this one, this will change its status from unchecked to checked. And if it's now checked, this selector will start to work for us. If this checkbox is in the status of checked, go to the sibling element that has the ID name of how to play, this is the real pop-up, and just give it display block. And now this pop-up is open. Nice. But now you need to ask yourself another question. How I'm closing the pop-up? And it's really the same idea if you're thinking about it. In this specific of this pop-up, the X button and the close button again are not button HTML element. Again, they are label HTML element. And in this case of this pop-up, the for attribute of both of them is connected to the same checkbox, this one. And this means that if I'm clicking on this button label element or this will trigger this checkbox. It will change its status from checked to unchecked. If it's unchecked, this selector will stop to work and we will get a display none that we declared in the beginning. And now the pop-up is being closed. Nice. But now you need to ask yourself another question. What is happening, for example, when I'm clicking on the save the world button, the play button of the game? When I'm clicking the save the world button, I need to do two operations instead of one. First, I need to hide the game menu frame, and then I need to open the game frame itself. How can I do two operations instead of one? And again, it's really the same idea if you are thinking about it. For example, with the checkbox of the ID of toggle game, if it's checked, first go to the sibling element with the class of game menu frame and give it display none. This way I'm hiding the game menu frame. And after that, go to the sibling element with the game frame and just give it display block. And in this way, I'm opening the game frame itself where we are playing the game. And if you are thinking about it, in this way, I can do as many operations that I want with the same status of one specific checkbox. This way of written is, of course, written with Sass. You can write it in two separated CSS selectors, but it's a lot more readable to read and write it with Sass. Nice, nice. But now let's jump for one of the most amazing tricks that I have in this game. When I'm clicking those viruses, they are being disappear and the score of the game is going up. We actually have here two CSS tricks. One is when I'm clicking those coronavirus, they need to be disappear. And the second, that I need to count all those dead viruses and to print a total score to the screen. Let's talk about those two CSS tricks. If you remember in the beginning, I told you that every coronavirus creature is a label HTML element with a class of coronavirus, and inside we have an input type radio. But I also told you that all the visual part of the coronavirus creature are in this div, the body of the coronavirus creature. We have the body, inside the body we have the eyes and the ears, but all the visual parts are in this specific element. And in the game, what I'm doing animation on the label HTML element. I'm telling the label to move around the screen. But because it has all the visual parts inside, it's taking with it all the visual parts inside. And when you are clicking on the visual parts, it's like you are clicking on the label HTML element. And because the input type radius is inside, it will automatically get trigger. You don't even need the for attribute and the ID name in this case if the input radius is inside the label. And this means that the virus is moving on the screen, the label is animation. You are clicking on the visual part of the virus. It's like you are clicking on the label HTML element. And because the input type radio is inside, it will automatically get trigger. And this input type radio will change the status from unchecked to checked. This status of in this input type radio, if it's changing to checked, this is telling us that the virus is being dead and we need to hide the visual part of the virus. To do that, I'm creating the CSS selector input type radio. If we are in status of checked, go to the sibling element with class of body. This is the visual part of the virus, and just give it opacity of 0. If this is checked, it will go and hide the visual part of the virus. And in this way, the viruses, when you are clicking on them, they are being disappear from the screen. But now I need to create the score feature for this game. How I can count all those dead viruses. And let's talk about the special second feature. To do that, I'm using a special CSS feature which is called CSS Counters. In order to the CSS counter to work correctly, it's need to be defined in our case before all the input type radio that we have in our own game. The easiest place to put it, it's on the body HTML element. How I'm creating a CSS counter? I'm selecting the body HTML element, and I'm using here the special property of counter reset, and I gave it any value that I want. I created here the value corona. Now I need to count all those dead viruses. How I'm counting them? Input type radio. If you're in status of checked, counter incrementing the corona value that we created here. And now I need to print the total score to the screen. In order to it to work correctly, the summarize point in the HTML need to be after all the input type radio that we have in our own game. The easiest place to put it, it's in the bottom of the HTML document. Here you can see I'm creating this div class sum. The text score is coming from the HTML and I want to print after the total score. To print after the total score, I'm just selecting the class sum with the after pseudo element using the content property that calling the CSS native counter function that just printing me the corona value that we incremented here and created here. And in this way, it's always listening and printing the total score to the screen. Because it's a very complicated example, let's see this in a real live code demo. Let's open the demo, and as you can see here, I created kind of 5 of coronavirus creature. You see labels, inside we have the input type radio that you can see it here. In the real game, I'm just giving this input opacity of 0, a place to summarize the total score, div class sum, the text score is coming from the HTML, the numbers are coming from the CSS. To create a CSS counter, I'm just declaring it on the body HTML element, counter recent, and I gave it the name Corona. For every input type radio, if you are in status of checked, counter increment me the Corona value that we declared on the body HTML element. Beside of it, if the input type radio is in status of checked, go to sibling element with a class of body and give it opacity of 0. You see, if this input type radio will be checked, it will go to the sibling element of this div with class body that it's all the visual part of the virus. This is the big black circle, and will give it opacity of 0. And to summarize the total score, I'm just selecting the class of sum with the after pseudo element, with the content property, with the CSS native counter function, and I'm just putting here the corona value that we incremented here and created here. Let's see that it really works. I'm clicking on the coronavirus. The score is going up. You can see even the radio button being checked. And in this way, you are creating a pure CSS score for a pure CSS game. Nice and very important trick to create a pure CSS game. But now let's jump to our next feature, pure CSS countdown. How can I create pure CSS countdown? Let's talk about it and see a real live demo code. As you can see here, the numbers are not coming from the HTML. They are coming from a CSS animation that I'm doing on the content property. but the animation is going only between 9 to 0. But here we see that it's going between 99 to 0. What is really happening here? What I'm doing here, I'm using here the two pseudo element of this span HTML element, the before and the after pseudo element, that you will understand that these numbers don't really have any connection between of them. They are working separately. To understand that, let's print here the text AA inside, and you will see that these both numbers are being separated. They don't really have any connection. The only reason that it's looking like one integer that is going down every second, it's only because the animation is very precise. And let's take a look on the code. As you can see, I'm selecting the class of count and I'm using the before pseudo element and I'm calling the animation of countdown. This animation, I'm telling it to work for 100 seconds and one iteration. 100 seconds, 10 frames between 9 to 0. This means that every 10 seconds it will go one number down, 20 another, 30 another, and 40 another. After 100 seconds, because it has only one iteration, I want it to stop on the last frame of the animation. To do that, I'm just adding here the special forwards keyword value that telling the animation, when you are finished, please be stuck on the last frame of the animation, exactly here. This is for the first value. For the second value, the after value, I'm calling the same animation, but now in a different way. Now I'm telling the animation to work for 10 seconds and 10 iteration. Because it's 10 seconds and total of 10 frames, every 1 second will go one number down, 2 seconds another, 3 seconds another. When it will finish the first iteration, it will do it again for another 9 iteration, again, because I told the animation to work for a total of 10 iteration. And after all those iterations, I want it to be stuck again, the second value, on the last frame of the animation of 0. To do that, I'm just put here again the forwards value, the telling the animation, after you have finished all your iteration, please be stuck on the last frame of the animation, and let's see that it really works. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and finish. Nice. Nice trick to create pure CSS countdown. Let's continue to our next trick, random values. First, I want to show you why I wanted to create random things in my own project. Let's take a look again on the game itself. As you can see here, the location of the viruses are randomized. Every virus has 6 different locations in the y-axis on its own axis of the x-axis. You see, every one different location. Even the scale of them is being randomized. Even the rotation of them is being randomized. But wait a minute. How can I create random stuff in CSS? You can't, but you can do it with Sass. Because it's a very important example, I want first to show you this in the real code. And you need to understand that if every one of the viruses has different location, this is mean that I needed to create 100 different animation. And because I didn't want to create them one by one, how I've done them, you can guess. I used a for loop that is running 100 iteration and creating me dynamically 100 different animation. For every one of the viruses, it has 6 different locations in the game. The translate X is always the same, but the translate Y, I'm using here the Sass random function that randomizes me a value between 1 to 80, and I'm just doubling it in 1VH. Even for the scale, I'm using the Sass random function, and even for the rotation, I'm using the Sass random function. That you will understand the random function and you will not afraid from using it, let's see another easier example to understand. Let's see the compile HTML that you will not be afraid from it. 6 empty li HTML element, nothing special. The numbers that you are seeing inside of them is not coming from the HTML, it's coming from the CSS. In the Sass, I have here a Sass for loop that creating me dynamically all the CSS selector between class 1 until class 6. In every one of the iteration, on the before pseudo element, on the content property, I'm using the Sass random function that randomizes me value between 1 to 80 and just doubling it in 1VH. And all those numbers that you're seeing right now are randomized. For you to believe me that they are really randomized, let's create that the Sass will be compiled again. To do that, I will just press here enter, and you will see that the numbers will be changed. As you can see, they are changing, and changing. And of course, that for those numbers to be changed, you need to compile the Sass code again and again and again, and that you will understand exactly what is happening because Sass is always being compiled to regular CSS. If I will show you, it will be just regular CSS. For those numbers to create, of course, we need to compile the Sass code to CSS again and again and again, according that they will change if you want them to change. Okay? Nice. Let's continue to our next trick. In the end of the game, I'm putting the game over curtain after 99 seconds, and I wanted to create a feature that the player can play this game again and again and again. And I had a problem. I need to think about how can I reset everything in this game. I understood that if I want that player can play this game again and again and again and again, I need to reset all the checkboxes that they will be unchecked, all the radio buttons of all those coronavirus that will be unchecked. And to do that, in the game over curtain, the back to the main menu is not a label HTML element in this case. In this case, is an input with type of reset. And this special input brings you the possibility to reset everything. But in order to it to work, the only thing that you need to do is to wrap everything with the form HTML element. And now when this input is inside of it, and you will click this back to main menu, it will automatically reset all the checkboxes that was checked to unchecked. This will bring you automatically to the game menu that you can now play the game again and again. And of course, all the radio button that was in status of checked will be unchecked. And now you can just play this game again and again and again. And the last feature that we need to talk about it. How can I know exactly when to put this game over curtain? And this is one of the most easiest tricks. In the game, in the animation, everyone knows that animation can get animation duration. This is telling the animation how much time it needs to take from the start until the end. But we are often forget that animation can get another animation duration, the animation duration of the delay of the animation. This is telling the animation after how much time you need to start. And what I'm doing here, I'm just giving in the real game animation delay of 99 seconds for this animation. In this example, I only put here 5 seconds that we don't need to wait 99 seconds, and that you will see that it really works. Let's refresh the screen and we will count together between 1 to 5. Okay, let's refresh the screen and we'll count. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Game over. Nice. We saw here a lot of CSS tricks that with them you can create pure CSS games. And you maybe think that this is the main key takeaway that I want you to take from this talk, but it isn't. The main key takeaway that I want you to take from this talk is to create your own code fun project that you are creating only for fun, not for your employer, not for your friends, for yourself, and only for fun. And why it's so important to create your own project for fun? We as adults, we sometimes forget that the best way to learn new stuff is by playing. When we are children, we're doing it naturally. In the animal kingdom, small kittens, they are like hunting each other. They are playing. And in this way, when they are adult, they know how to hunt. But we as adults, we're starting to learn things in the boring way, in the hard way, instead of enjoying that we can enjoy in the way. In this way, you are creating yourself any project in code. It can be in CSS, JavaScript, everything that you want. You are enjoying to create this project. You're beginning to be a better web developer. And if you are a better web developer, you will get in the end a better salary. And even this is not important. Life are so short. Create your own project because you can have fun, enjoy, and create everything that you can create. My friends, I'm Elad Shechter. I'm a CSS HTML architect. I'm doing a lot of stuff on CSS that you can find in my own social network. You can here scan the QR code if you want the presentation. And my friends, thank you very much for listening.